It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Shell-shocked, comatose, and left for dead on the banks of the Brazos River, the end was near, and fate seemed inescapable. But then, roaring back to life with a scoring barrage for the ages, the prodigal, the young bloods, and the marksman wrote an improbable, triumphant chapter in the annals of Sooner lore. The miracle at McLean won't soon be forgotten.
Dig in! This is Champions Loop!
Rambo in motion. Snap to Hurts, fakes a handoff. Rolls right, looks, end zone, caught! Touchdown! Braden Willis! They've come all the way back! From the 40. Brewer wasn't expecting the snap. He's got it. Quick throw out. It is!
Yes!
Intercepted!
He got it this time.
Intercepted! It was Benito!
Now, as this crimson and cream machine barrels toward glory, there are just 2 more stops on the road to Arlington. But one slip-up, one mishap, one setback could render the entire narrative irrelevant. Game on. Sooner Nation, this is Championship November. This is history in the making. And this is Gameday U.
Good morning and welcome back to Gameday U here at the University of Oklahoma. I'm Brooke Mursky here alongside my lovely analysts, William Sule, Sam Brown, and Shiloh Sellers. Guys, how are you doing this morning?
Good. Welcome
Even
to
better
the set.
having you
Thank
here.
you.
Yeah. You know, are you honored, maybe humbled? What are some
Yes,
emotions
very,
right
very
now?
honored. Christian Nunley is out of town, so I'll be filling in for him today, but I'm hyped to get to talk football with you guys.
Huge upgrade for us on the set. I mean, just from like a looks perspective, probably like quality of the content perspective.
overall.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm
and I don't want to
happy
beat on
host.
Christian because he's not here to defend himself.
He's not gonna be able to, well, he's not gonna see it anyway.
He's not
It's-
awake. No
It's just
way.
gonna go straight
yeah,
over his
he's
head.
straight
0% chance.
snoozing.
Well, as you guys know, OU made a historic comeback against Waco, or against the Baylor Bears in Waco.
Those people
so,
in Waco.
what are you guys' takeaways from the game?
I mean, I would have to say the biggest takeaway for those watching is ball security. I mean, Jalen had 2 fumbles, 1 near fumble, so we're just gonna like chalk that up to 3. Because he dropped, I mean, he literally sat the ball on the ground during one time. Like,
Very
it
gently.
looked so soft
Very
and like,
gently.
here you go, you may have it now. And then he also had an interception. I mean, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but when that happens, like OU being the really great offense, the #1 in the nation that they are, they just give so much opportunity to the other team to really make a difference in the game, and that's exactly what Baylor did. Is they took every opportunity they could that OU messed up and then capitalized on it and then had the touchdown, or it wasn't until pretty late in the game where they were forced to punt. Every possession they made count, and OU gave it away, quite literally. And so that had to be my biggest takeaway. I was pretty shocked to see that. I don't think we've ever seen OU give the ball away that many times. The offense was definitely not clicking. They were missing CeeDee Lamb, so that could have been a little bit of part of it. But that for sure is something that I'm going to be keeping an eye on this next coming game today.
Yeah, I mean, all the mistakes that OU have made so far kind of seem to be self-caused. When you look at Kansas State, Kansas State, Iowa State, and then Baylor last week, everything was kind of shooting themselves in the foot, allowing the team a chance to get back in the game. But at the same time, you have to give Lincoln Riley a ton of credit for the adjustments that they made at halftime. Down 31-10, looked like the game was already over. I mean, we were talking about wrapping it up early, hitting the road back to Norman maybe a little early, and all of a sudden the Sooners score on the first drive, and then they just start rolling. I mean, if you look at some of the numbers in the second half, OU outscored Baylor 24-zip, first of all. I couldn't tell you the last time the defense has allowed 0 points in a half. 58 plays to Baylor's 16, 368 yards for Oklahoma to Baylor's 58. 22 first down to Baylor's 4, and the time of possession is one that really stands out to me. Over 24 minutes for Oklahoma and just under 6 for Baylor in the second half. They absolutely controlled the game on both sides of the ball and on special teams, and that's why they came out of Baylor with the win.
Oh yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. The offense really, turned it around is like an understatement for what they did in the second half. They looked dead in the water in the first half, and really they really sprung back to life. But to me, my biggest takeaway has easily got to be the QB pressure from this defensive line. In the 6 drives that Baylor failed to score in this game, 4 of them either had a sack or a tackle for loss. And for me, that says a lot because it means that Ronnie Perkins and those guys, and especially Ronnie Perkins, the man had a monster game, 3 sacks, 4 tackles for loss. He was out here making plays when it mattered the most. In the second half, he had a sacks in the final 2 drives, a tackle for loss on the first drive in the third quarter to really set the tone. This defensive line got after it when they needed to, and I think that was so big for this defense because this secondary obviously is a unit that has been much maligned throughout the years. They've been better this year, obviously, but they are still they've got a long ways to go talent-wise. So to me, what they have to be able to do is this defensive line is so important to whether or not this secondary can succeed. Because if this defensive line can get pressure and make that time in the pocket collapse and really make the quarterback have to improvise and do something different, it can be huge for this defense.
I agree. When they recruited Ronnie Perkins, they recruited him with that same thought process of you're going to be a big playmaker for us. And I felt like for the first time in the Baylor game was the really time that we've seen that kind of play out of him. And that's exactly what Lincoln said after the game, that they've been expecting out of him all season long for a while now. And kind of going back to your point, I was in that same boat after the game, just looking at all the stats and stuff in front of me. I was like, what is going on? Let's break this down. OU held Baylor to in the first half. Baylor had 36 plays for 238 yards. In the second half, 16 plays for 69 yards.
Nice.
And about 50 of those
That
came
is
in the last drive.
crazy.
Yeah.
Those are wild numbers. And then on the flip side, OU in the first had 37 plays for 157 yards. And then in the second, they had 58 plays for 368 yards. That is just crazy. That really speaks to how the defense clicked into gear and said, okay, we got to put a stop to this. We got to bail our offense out. And then at the same time, I feel like Jalen, he talked about it a little bit after the game, how as a leader, he made mistakes and that his guys really had to pick him up. I think that it was the first time I've really seen Jalen look like a true Sooner. After the game, he ran to our side of the crowd. He jumped in. He was celebrating with all the guys. You could really see that it was kind of the first time that he's put trust in his team and that it really paid out. And that was something that I really enjoyed seeing.
Yeah, and their game plan was actually pretty similar to how teams have been attacking them. If you look at Kansas State and the Iowa State game, their whole offensive strategy revolves around, keeping hold of the ball, keeping OU's offense off the field, churning out the clock, and forcing the quarterback to make plays, essentially. They forced Charlie Brewer to make plays. He couldn't make the plays, but OU controlled the clock. Baylor's offense hardly saw the field, and when they did, we saw the old defense where the OU bull rushes the quarterback. They're solid in coverage, but it really focuses around creating chaos at the line of scrimmage. That's going to be a key thing again today.
Yeah, and honestly, if you really look at the entirety of the game, the Baylor offense was never super effective in a long drive capacity.
They're taking what Oklahoma gave them.
Yeah, they started twice in their own red zone. It was the same in the red zone. It was the same problem that Oklahoma had against Kansas State. That pick that Jalen threw that got them all the way down to the 10. The fumble obviously was almost, maybe not right in the red zone, but it was
close enough.
The start of an Oklahoma drive, so it was deep in Oklahoma territory. This Baylor offense, starting from their own, deep in their own territory, was never really that effective.
No.
So it was all about whether, and you said it at the beginning of the show, it's self-inflicted wounds. This team, when they come out and do exactly what they're supposed to every single game, they compete with anybody in the country. There is no team in the Big 12.
That second half team is a playoff team.
Yeah.
If they play like that for 4 quarters, that is a playoff team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Sam, you used the word adjustment. Shiloh, you showed us all the stats about that coming from the first half to the second half. But let's take a look at what some of the players had to say about their mindset going into the second half.
We believe in ourselves. I think we believe in that regardless of how the game's going, good, bad, whatever, that we can find a way to do it. I've said a lot. We've really worked hard to try to improve throughout the years, and a lot of times these November games tend to be against the best teams too, and so we've done it against some good competition. We had obviously played a great team the other night. We're getting ready to play a really good football team here coming up against.
At one point, everybody thought we were down and out, but we knew as a team that if we continued to fight, we knew what we had in that room, and so we never lost faith in that. And it's just amazing to see when a group of people can continue to keep their faith, continue to work no matter what. It's amazing to see what happens, and so we didn't stop believing in ourselves, and we just went out there and continued to fight. And no matter what, we had each other's back.
Coach Grant's he never shows panic at all. Down 28-3, he never showed panic. He always he's just always preaching. One takeaway, one stop can change this whole game. So we got that takeaway after coming out of halftime, and as you can see, that changed the whole game. It changed the whole momentum of the game.
I think in a lot of ways it got to that moment, where we talk about 3 and out and takeaway. Well, there's nothing in that moment. You don't have a 25-point takeaway. That doesn't exist. So we got to get one. We got to get the ball back to the offense somehow, some way, to give ourselves a chance. So what we need to do just in that moment, focus on getting the ball back to the offense. And my argument would be the first possession of the game, we had to do the game the same way. And the second, and so, but in any event, I think you saw some of that where guys the clutter was maybe cleared out because you had nowhere else to, no one's coming to save you in those moments. You got to go do it yourself. And so I give the guys a lot of credit. There's a reason that doesn't happen very often. And so as frustrated as I might get, I give them a lot of credit.
Well, in a situation like that, you want to try and win the fourth quarter. But regardless of what the scoreboard says, what the time of possession was, we wanted to execute and just play good Oklahoma football. We did enough. So.
Yeah, no, we found a way. I do think it's some of the culture in this place and the teams that we've had and players that are, winning games and having a chance to win a championship at the end of the season has been of the utmost importance to them.
Man, those are some significant changes they had to make from the first half to go to the second to make this historic comeback win. Guys, what do you have to say about it?
I mean, they said it, a takeover can change everything, and especially when you're giving the ball away, you've got to get time back. I think that time of possession in the first half for OU was a killer. They didn't have time to make anything happen. And then when they did have the ball, we saw. So, I think in the second half, whenever the OU's caught that ball and it made it only a 1 touchdown of a different type of game, there was you could see it from the press box, the difference in mentality it gave those guys. It really turned everything around. Sorry, I lost his name. Lincoln Riley.
It's a hard one.
Oh, yeah, I know. And it's just the head coach, Shiloh. It's what I need to drink some more coffee. But he talked about how they never stopped believing. And having been there for Kansas State and watching that loss, you definitely saw that I don't know what to do now kind of feeling. Sure. And then in Baylor, when Theo Wease got that ball, the sideline erupted. It went wild. You just saw this a wave of crimson and cream going up and down. And so I think that's one thing that they've really got to focus on is keeping that momentum up, keeping that really good mentality going and believing in yourself, especially when your leader is making mistakes and he is having a few misfires here or there. That's when it really comes down to the collective to be it's okay, Jalen, we got this.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Last year's team would have never been able to pull that off.
No.
Plain and simple.
Yep.
Just because the mentality's never there. That team would have collapsed, essentially. That could have gotten, if it were 28-3 at one point in Waco last year, it would have gotten ugly fast. But this year, it's a different team. It's a different mentality. That's what we preached early on in the season, and we finally saw that come to fruition on Saturday. The way the team came together, kind of rallied around each other, had trust in each other. That's something that they talked about that they had lost at Kansas State. The players lost trust in each other. On Saturday in Waco, they had trust in each other. They knew they could come back. They knew they just needed a little bit of a spark. Maybe something could happen. That Jalen Hurts touchdown at the start of the second half to Austin Stogner, that was just the boost they needed. And then after that, they just kind of took it and ran with it. But this is a completely different team in the head, and a lot of that has to do with Alex Grinch.
Yeah, and the quote from him that really stands out to me is, "No one's coming to save you," which, to your point, has been the case the last 5 years. Like in the Baker and Kyler Murray era, the defense was there to be saved. Yeah. They were the damsel in distress. They were basically useless. Like they were Rapunzel in the tower. They couldn't help themselves. This defense is not that defense. Yeah. Like they are out there to make their own name, to make their own plays. I mean, they held Baylor scoreless in the second half, and that, like, on multiple opportunities, they had 5 different opportunities to score, and they couldn't fail to do so every single time. Like that like he's to your point again, the defense last year could not do that. Right. And it's not even really talent, because the talent isn't that much different. Yeah. It's the mentality, it's the coaching, it's the culture that Alex Grinch has come in and said to these guys, hey, like, you are not a damsel in distress. You are D1 scholarship football athletes.
You are
It is up to you.
Act like it. Be the people we recruited you to be. Right. And, like, come out and be a part of this team. Like, don't just be, like, kind of, like, watching from the sideline.
Yeah. Well, let's take a quick timeout here. When we come back, Meredith Mulkey is live from Heisman Park to show us the Sooners' way into the top 4, and our analysts will share who they think already has their playoff spot locked up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back here in the studio. We're going to take you back out to Meredith as soon as we get some technical difficulties figured out. But, guys, let's talk about the college football playoff. Who do you think is on lock? Shiloh, let's start with you.
I think that, first of all of our takes are going to be very similar because there's not that many teams on lock. My first one, and by far the one that I think is going to stay probably in that #1 spot, is got to be LSU. I mean, they are second in total offense and passing offense, only behind Oklahoma. These Tigers are mean. I mean, they're looking tough, and they've got Joe Burrow leading them. I mean, he's just Joe Burrow for Heisman. There's Joe Burrow, and then there is everyone else. I mean, he is just a rock star. This LSU team has beaten Bama, Florida, and Auburn, so they've really got the strength of schedule to back up their play. They're undefeated so far. I mean, it's just hard to say anything else. And then my other team's got to be OSU. Now their strength of schedule.
Oklahoma State? Wow.
No Tyler Wallace, no Spencer Sanders. Ohio
State. Get those Cowboys out of there. You know, their strength of schedule isn't completely there because they've only played Wisconsin and Michigan State. But they're #1 in scoring defense and total defense, along with being second in red zone defense and team sacks. This defense is mean. I mean, that's really what is carrying the Buckeyes. And I would also say, their margin of with the
margin of victory.
What am I trying to say? Good God.
Well, it is a little bit more coffee. I don't blame you.
Their margin of victory has been phenomenal every single game, and I know a lot of people are being like, "Well, who they beat?" They beat Wisconsin and they beat Michigan State, and when you're just pummeling the crap out of everybody, I don't think it really matters. They do have a pretty tough schedule, especially this week with Penn State. I think
College Game Day.
You know, that's going to be the who they beat. Hopefully Penn State. Hopefully Penn State.
Game day show. The second best game day show in America.
Right. I think that I think we'll see those two teams in the top 4 for sure.
Yeah, I think I agree with you for the most part. LSU, I think, is locked in, essentially. These guys get after it, and they look like the best team in the country, plain and simple. You know, like Shiloh said, second in scoring offense, and they're going up against SEC defenses, some good talent, obviously.
Sure.
They're 16th in the country in strength of schedule. But that doesn't really matter because they've easily won most of their games. The tightest one they had was Alabama. Joe Burrow, it's his Heisman to lose at this point. 41 total touchdowns and only 6 interceptions. But I'm actually going to go on a different route, and my second lock for the playoff is going to be the Clemson Tigers. And this is a kind of a different take. I'm not saying that they are locked in right now. Like if they lose, they're still going to get in.
Like that's the question that we've been asked?
Well, I'm just saying they're not going to lose. I mean, look at Clemson. Look at who they play. Clemson's going to be in the playoff. You'd be crazy not to. I mean, yes, they have a week straight to schedule, 68th in the country. But if you look at it, they've won 9 games by at least 30 points, including each of the last 4 weeks. Their only ranked win of it is A&M. That's a tough one, but the committee talks a lot about the eye test. So Clemson looks good on paper. They're defending national champions. They're going to if they go undefeated going into the college football playoff, they should get a chance to defend their crown, plain and simple. So I think those 2 teams are locked in as of now.
So you don't have Ohio State locked in?
No, because I think Ohio. I mean, there's still a possibility. Shiloh talked about it. Ohio State's got Ohio State's got Penn State, Michigan, and then the Big Ten title game over the next 4 weeks. You know, Clemson's got a bye week right now at South Carolina and the ACC title against Virginia, Pitt, or Virginia Tech.
So they have a crappy schedule, and thus.
They're the defending national champions. You go to the playoffs in 12 and 0, and you deserve a chance.
The committee has said over and over again that doesn't matter.
True.
So, but like,
well, they say that, but then Clemson's still at number 3, and they're not going to put. They're not going to put in a one loss. They're not going to put in one of those one-loss teams.
Without going into too much more arguing, who do you think is going to be it?
Okay, I mean,
he's like, y'all got to shut
Brooks just like, get back on track, everybody. All right, fine. To me, it's 2 teams. It's Ohio State and it's LSU. I mean, the reason that I don't have Clemson is because if they lose one time, they're out.
They're not going to lose.
We'll see it. Like go to have fun in the whatever.
What's Tyler Helinski is going to carry the Gamecocks to victory.
They beat Georgia.
Yeah,
it's not unheard of. I mean,
that's not happening.
But like to me, it's Ohio State and it's LSU, and that's really the only 2 locks because they're the only teams I think that are left that if they lose, they're still in. Because to me, Ohio State, like you said, they're straight to schedule. They've played a bunch of really good teams, but LSU to me, they only have Arkansas, Texas A&M, and the SEC championship left. Arkansas, you might as well give that one over to them. Texas A&M, they're terrible too, even though their fan base thinks they're the best college football team that has ever graced this God-given earth. I'm not going to get too into Texas A&M.
I thought Jimbo Fisher was supposed to be the Messiah.
He's clearly not. But Ohio State, I mean, they played the number 8th ranked Penn State at Michigan and then the Big Ten championship. And I don't see them losing more than 2 of those games. Like, there's no way they lose twice within that stretch. And to me, that means that they're going to, even if they lose once, if they lose today, or if somehow Jim Harbaugh pulls the rabbit out of his hat and somehow finally gets the devil off his back and beats Ohio State. Like, Ohio State's still in the Big Ten.
I'm not holding my breath.
Neither am I, which is my point. Like, Ohio State still gets in the Big Ten championship, and as long as they take care of business there, and I don't think that they will have a problem. I mean, Minnesota's obviously impressed, but I really don't see Ohio State having a problem there. Even if they lose today, or if they lose in the Big Ten championship game, I believe Ohio State's still in. And LSU, even if they lose to Georgia in the SEC title game, I believe is still in. The committee would just have a whole mess on their hands if Georgia beats LSU in that title game, because I don't think there's any way they keep the SEC title champion out, and then I don't think there's any way they keep LSU out.
Let's put it this way, because you bring up an interesting question. You think if Ohio State loses, say, Penn State wins the Big Ten or something like that, and Ohio State loses in the title game, you think they put Penn State perhaps over Ohio State, or maybe the Pac-12 champion, a one-loss Pac-12 champ, over a one-loss Ohio State that's looked dominant the whole way, yet ends up on a loss and without a conference crown?
I think they'd still put Ohio State in over a one-loss.
Absolutely.
Because I think Ohio State will have had to beat enough good teams to get to where they're going to be a one-loss champion. In addition to the fact that I really don't think Oregon's that good, and they, again, to the eye test, haven't proven that, and they beat an Auburn team, which is, they lost to an Auburn team, which is obviously one of the better losses in the country right now. But Auburn is slowly kind of working their way backwards, but I just don't believe that. Clemson, to me, if they lose, is one and done.
Clemson to me isn't
Hasta la
going to lose.
vista.
So.
You're probably right. They're probably not going to lose, but if they do, it can't be a lock if they're almost out.
Yeah, well, we've got Meredith live with more on the Sooners from Heisman Park. Meredith?
Guys, I'm here in Heisman Park, and I have to say it's a little cold this morning as we get ready for the last home game of the season for the Oklahoma Sooners. They're 9-1 on the season and currently sit in the number 9 spot for the college football playoff rankings. Now, after tonight's game with TCU, OU will have one more test down in Stillwater, and the Sooners need to dominate these next 2 games if they want any chance at making the playoffs. Baylor, the Sooners only moved up 1 spot in the rankings. Now, I'm not saying OU should already be in the top 4, but out of the group of 1-loss teams, OU's blemish could potentially boost their resume. Oregon's only defeat came at the hands of 3-loss Auburn in the season opener, and number 7 Utah lost to then unranked USC back in September. But those losses obviously aren't enough to get the Sooners to the playoffs. For OU's chances to improve, they will need a lot of games to play in their favor. Ideally, Oklahoma needs number 2 Ohio State to take care of business with Penn State here in just a few hours in the Horseshoe. The Buckeyes are favored in this matchup, and a win will secure their Big Ten Conference title game spot. For next week, the Sooners need an Auburn upset over the Crimson Tide. With star quarterback Tua Tagovailoa out and the game being played in Auburn, a win doesn't sound impossible. But Alabama is still stacked with elite players on both sides of the ball, so it won't be an easy feat for the Tigers' freshman QB, Bo Nix. Now, conference title games will also play a huge role in keeping the Sooners' playoff dreams alive. The SEC matchup will be LSU and Georgia, and if Oklahoma has any chance of taking over Georgia's number 4 spot, the Tigers will need to cage the Bulldogs. In the Pac-12, the current number 6 and 7 teams are the likely contenders. If Utah can even just squeak by Oregon to secure that title championship, it would definitely help the Sooners' case. And the Sooners have to play their absolute best game of the season against Baylor in the Big 12 title game and win in fashion for any last hope of their chance to win a natty this year. A lot will have to happen for Oklahoma to make it into the top 4, but don't rule them out just yet. Their road to the playoff may seem a little far-fetched as of right now, but as we all know, anything can happen in college football. Now the playoffs talk doesn't stop here. Let's send it back to Brooke and the rest of the crew.
Hey, we're having some technical difficulties. Thanks, Meredith. Now, guys, let's talk top 25 in the college football playoff. I think there's a video. Let's try to roll that. But kind of talk through it. What do you think about OU at number 9?
A lot of stuff has to
it's
happen.
not good if you live in Norman or if you bleed crimson. I mean, everybody bleeds crimson. But if you're an OU fan, like, you can't be encouraged by being ranked number 9. Yeah. It's a long road to hoe if the Sooners are trying to get back in. I mean, it's not impossible, but to me, there's a lot of really good teams between them and the 4th spot.
And there's a lot of chaos that could happen, but it needs to happen. You know, I think a lot of OU fans were kind of disappointed after that huge win at Baylor to see them only move up 1 spot. Yeah. And, you know, we always talked about how in the years past when they lost that one game and they still had a chance, how they were in a higher spot at number 9. But you also had to look at the teams that were above them. And those teams ended up knocking each other out. It's going to be hard for these teams to kind of knock each other out. I mean, there's going to be one SEC champ, one Big Ten champ. They might throw around, like, give the Pac-12 a 4th spot. They haven't done that in several years, and both Oregon and Utah looking convincing so far.
I think the biggest reason why Sooners should be a little bit nervous is just because Baylor's going to be the biggest team they've beaten. I mean, granted, we beat Texas when they were ranked, but look at how they're doing right now.
Terrible.
So, right, I think that's
on the bright side,
another
that
big
doesn't mean
issue.
much for LSU.
Oh, they don't need it, unfortunately. We need the quality of wins, like to Shiloh's point.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be really hard for them to kind of like prove that they should go up when these other teams that are in this top 10 have beaten really good opponents and then like better than, I think Baylor was like 12th or something. I mean, we're seeing like Bama and LSU, like those 2 and 3s, those 3 and 4s, the like really close games, and that's who is in front of Oklahoma, and for that reason it's going to be really hard to see them work their way up.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately this year too, the Pac-12's gotten back in the mix.
Yeah.
And, like in previous years, the Pac-12 has been irrelevant at this point in the year, and like Oklahoma fans should be big fans of the state of Arizona, as both Oregon and Utah play at Arizona and at Arizona State today.
Fingers crossed they lose.
Big Arizona fans this weekend.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, let's wrap it up here. When we return, we'll send it over to Kurt Watson and the studio crew to share their heroes and zeros of Week 12. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to Gameday U, the one and only student-produced pregame show here at the University of Oklahoma. Now, the fact that it is a student-produced show allows us to have different shows like today. It's Producers Week here in Gaylord Hall Studios. Of course, you know our producer Parker Thune from Hit the Books, but I'm Kurt Watson, the director of the show, and down at the end we have Spencer Forsyth, our creative director. Guys, how are we doing?
I'll tell you what, Kurt, these are some of the best days of the year, these late season college football Saturdays, and there's nowhere I'd rather spend it than between two of my best friends in the world. So looking forward to it.
Love
Absolutely.
That. Spencer?
It's a great day for some college football.
Yeah.
It's week 13, so.
It's a great day for a great day. I'm excited to get after it with y'all. But before we dig into this week, let's take a look back at the last week in college football. Here's Dylan Rivera with top 5 plays of week 12.
Thanks, Kurt. We start things off with a special team score. After Wisconsin's defense gives up a TD to Nebraska, Aaron Cruikshank answers back with an 89-yard kickoff return. A stiff arm to the kicker, a little shake and bake for the defender, and he's off to the races. 6 points on the board for the Badgers. Wisconsin would pull out a win in this one, 37-21. Over to the ACC, it's Louisville and NC State. And how about this throw from kicker Ryan Shalafo? He takes the hit and still finds Marshawn Ford in the end zone. Shalafo has 0 made field goals in his career, but he does have 1 touchdown pass. It's Michigan and Michigan State in the battle for the Paul Bunyan Trophy. Wideout Donovan Peoples-Jones puts in some extra effort with the dive for the pylon. Harbaugh and his khaki pants are loving that one. The Wolverines claim the mighty Lumberjack this year with a 44-10 win over the Spartans. Here's a little something you don't see every day. An onside kick returned for a touchdown. Georgia Southern's Monquavion Brinson jumps out in front of the ball, gets by one would-be tackler, and finds pay dirt. The score caps off a 51-29 win over UL Monroe. And finally, your number 1 play of the week. Darrington Evans gets the handoff and goes down just a few yards out. Wait, no he doesn't! The junior running back lands on top of a defender and gets an easy walk-in touchdown. If you don't believe me, let's roll the tape again in slow motion. You'll see Evans collide with 2 defenders, and does his knee hit the turf? You tell me. Parker, Spencer, Kurt, back over to you.
Thanks for that, Dylan. Well, guys, there was no shortage of both talent and failure this past week in college football. That means it's time for heroes and zeros. So we're going to start out with your heroes. Spencer Forsyth, what do you got?
Yeah, my heroes had a tough start to his 2019 campaign, but it's Shea Patterson at Michigan. As I mentioned, he's had a bad few games to start the season. He's only completing 57% of his passes. He's got 1,700 yards and 12 touchdowns thus far. But offensive coordinator Josh Gaddis did a great job of getting him comfortable early in the rivalry game against Michigan State. A lot of easy throws. He was able to sit in the pocket and stay comfortable. And then he was able to get moving with his legs and get comfortable running the ball on the ground as well, kind of open up that second dynamic. So I think in terms of a game plan, Josh Gaddis did a great job of getting him comfortable early so that he could open up his play down the field later on. Shea's not a quarterback that loves to throw the ball deep. He's never loved to throw the ball deep. For his career, he only averages 7.5 yards per attempt. But against Michigan State, he was able to capitalize against some shoddy play in the secondary, and he had 5 20-plus yard completions. 3 of those went for touchdowns. So I think Shea Patterson had his best game definitely at Michigan, his 3rd best game of his career statistically, and it was one that he won't forget. So Shea Patterson is my hero of week 12.
Shea Patterson. Out of everybody you could have picked, you picked Shea Patterson.
Well, see,
I mean, you had to qualify your hero right off the bat, which kind of shoots your case in the foot right there. Listen, for everybody watching at home, I apologize. I get that as you're sitting there watching this show right now, you're probably thinking, yeah, that's why they keep those guys on the other side of the camera. But
listen,
it's a fair point.
Here's the deal with Shea Patterson.
I promise you it gets better.
This is a week-by-week hero in zero. He was a hero in week 12. He had a great game, really good numbers, 24 for 33, 384 yards and 4 touchdowns. Shea Patterson had a great week 12, and that's why he was my hero for this week. Now, he hasn't been my hero for the entire season, but for this week, Shea Patterson was the hero. I didn't want to go with Joe Burrow. It was such a cop-out to go with Joe Burrow, so I decided to go with Shea Patterson because he had a great week. But I also want to talk, I have a little bit of beef with the NCAA. Why are sacks still considered negative rushing yards for a quarterback? If you look at Shea Patterson's stats this week, he had 4 rushes for 28 yards on the ground, but then he took 4 sacks for a loss of 43 yards. So his official stat line at the end of the game was 8 carries for negative 15 yards. When that's not an accurate representation of how he ran the ball this weekend, it's not. Sacks aren't considered negative rush yards in the NFL. Why are they still considered negative rush yards in the college game?
That's fair.
All right, Parker, enough roasting Spencer for his hero. Who was yours?
Okay, fair enough. You know what? Let's talk about a player who not only was a hero in Week 12, but has been a hero all year. There's a fella down in Baton Rouge who has not gotten near enough love for one of the best seasons that we've seen in recent memory at his position. And no, I'm not talking about Joe Burrow. Look, Burrow gets all the hype, deservedly so. He's going to win the Heisman Trophy. That's a foregone conclusion at this point. But let's acknowledge and recognize the guy that does a lot of legwork for Joe Burrow, the guy that I believe should and will win the Biletnikoff Award, and that is Ja'Marr Chase. I tell you what, this guy against Ole Miss last week, 8 catches, 227 yards, 3 touchdowns, really was the difference in a game that was a lot closer than many people expected. John Rice Plumlee and the Rebels were able to hang with the Tigers for the majority of this contest, but in the end, it was Chase's big plays that made the difference. He's a Biletnikoff semifinalist. That was announced this past week. On the season, 57 catches, 1,116 yards, and 13 touchdowns. 4th in the country in yards, tied for 2nd in receiving touchdowns. Among receivers with at least 1,000 yards, he has the best yards per reception. This guy is a big play machine. Now, Joe Burrow, as I mentioned, getting all the love, probably going to win the Heisman Trophy, but he's not doing it all on his own. Ja'Marr Chase and Justin Jefferson, especially, 2 guys that have made a huge difference down at LSU and are really kind of changing the game down in the SEC. You know, when we saw Tua Tagovailoa, I have such trouble pronouncing that last name. I feel like there's no real accurate way to pronounce it, but when we saw Tua Tagovailoa step in at Alabama and bring the air raid offense to the SEC, it forced the rest of the league to adapt and adjust. And LSU was the first team to do that this year with Joe Burrow, Ja'Marr Chase, and Justin Jefferson, and of course Clyde Edwards-Helaire out of the backfield.
I think if we don't see CeeDee Lamb on the field this week with Oklahoma against TCU, Ja'Marr Chase is the front runner for the Biletnikoff after this week.
I'd say you can about lock it up.
All right, fair enough. Well, with good, there's always some bad. So let's go with your zeros next. Spencer Forsyth, what do you got?
My 0 has actually, conversely, as opposed to Shea Patterson, who hasn't had a great start to the season, my 0 has actually had a pretty good start, and that's why he's my 0. It's Jamie Newman from Wake Forest. Now look, Wake Forest was hyped up as the team that was supposed to challenge Clemson in the ACC. They climbed as high as 19th in the AP poll in Week 6. They were supposed to be the team that we could look to challenge Clemson. Jamie Newman laid an absolute egg. He's completing 63% of his passes for 2,300 yards and 22 touchdowns this year. 6 for 14, 41 pass yards, 2 interceptions, a 38 passer rating against Clemson. And I will say Clemson has a very strong defense. They hit their stride late in the season every year. It's the way Clemson seems to do it. But Jamie Newman looked like a deer in the headlights this week. 2.9 yards per attempt. That's the lowest I've ever seen in watching football at all. So it was a bad game all around for him. Bad decisions, bad throws, and it just was not the game that Wake Forest needed out of Jamie Newman if they were going to beat Clemson.
I tell you what, Wake Forest, I feel like climbed in the rankings a little too fast.
I would
because you know the Demon Deacons. It was their first ranking, I believe, in the AP poll since 2006. So they jumped out to that 7-0 start or whatever it was, and I think a lot of people said, you know what? Yeah, that team has a really good chance of challenging Clemson. But I think we were a little too quick to pull the trigger.
I don't disagree with that at all. I think a lot of their rankings were the fact that they were undefeated to start the season. They looked good in the first few weeks. And North Carolina, a team that we saw challenge Clemson, North Carolina played them really close. It was a good game. So I think it was just the assumption that they're in the ACC, they're playing really well, so they obviously are deserving to be a ranked team, but that wasn't true.
Well, I'm going to stick with bad quarterbacks as kind of our theme surrounding these zeros. I'm going to head out west to the Pac-12, and I want to talk about a guy that was not just a poor performer this past week in Week 12, but has really not lived up to the hype and to the expectations ever since he set foot on the field for the UCLA Bruins. That is Dorian Thompson-Robinson, a guy that was the 2nd-ranked dual-threat quarterback in his class coming out of high school, drew the starting nod as a true freshman, and has been atrocious ever since. I'm sorry, but this guy is dragging UCLA down, and you have to wonder, at what point does Chip Kelly make the switch? In this game last week against Utah, Thompson Robinson goes 20 for 36, 219 yards, no touchdowns, turned the ball over 4 times. You see in this fumble here was returned for a touchdown by the Utes. Think about this, Spencer. Going into this game, improbably, if UCLA had won their final 3 games, they would have won the Pac-12 South and played in the Pac-12 title game after starting the year 0-3. Look, it wasn't that long ago that UCLA was a top-of-the-line program, but DTR just continues to turn in dud after dud. He's looked overmatched from the get-go, and he's really crippling his team.
And I think if you go even farther than just DTR, you've got to look at Chip Kelly as a coach. He's not lived up to the expectations. He was a great coach at Oregon. He made the move to the NFL, and he's struggled ever since he's been back in the college game. So at what point does UCLA decide not only to move on from DTR, but from Chip Kelly as well?
All right, well, we need a break. Spencer and Parker need some time to prepare for 3 and Out, but when we come back, you will not want to miss the takes from these two. You're watching Game Day U on OU TV. Back to action here in the Gaylord Hall studios. Again, I'm Kurt Watson alongside Parker Thune and Spencer Forsyth. Gentlemen, what are the thoughts on being on this side of the camera so far?
It's empowering, I'll say that.
It's a good word. It's a good word. It's a lot of fun.
Oh my gosh.
I'm enjoying it.
All right, well, it is time for 3 and Out, where we discuss the biggest storylines out of college football for this week. First up, we head to Tuscaloosa. So we had a big injury this past week with the Crimson Tide star Tua Tagovailoa, and he is out for the season. With pay-for-play being one of the hottest topics in college football right now, will Tua's injury have a big effect on the debate as to what pay-for-play is going to look like and what his eligibility might look like and the eligibility for student-athletes in the future? Spencer?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think it's definitely kind of a hot-button issue, especially with the NCAA working towards the pay-for-play rules and the proposals they've made. But I'm going to say yes. It's more of a hope that I think this is the next step in actually having some action take place. You know, an injury this big to this big of a star in college football, I think is the kick in the pants that the NCAA needs in order to actually make some change. If you look at the numbers, Tua was projected to be the #1 overall pick in this year's NFL draft. #1 overall pick in the 2019 draft, Kyler Murray earns $58.8 million over the course of his rookie contract. If you look at the drop to number 20 overall, that was Noah Fant last year. His contract is worth $20 million over 4 years. And then if you drop out of the first round to 33rd overall, that was Byron Murphy from Washington. He's making $11.2 million over his first 4 years. So that's a $30 to $40 million difference in your rookie contract, which is a huge deal for a player of Tua's magnitude that was supposed to be the #1 overall pick. So I think this is something that you really have to look at it for the NCAA. These guys are going out and risking their livelihoods every single week. And for your stars to be risking it like they have, to see a guy like Tua go down with this big of an injury, this is the kind of injury that ended Bo Jackson's career. And I know the medical technology and stuff like that has advanced quite a bit since then. But I think this is definitely a bit of a wake-up call maybe that you've got to make action. And the proposal that they've made as far as pay-for-play is concerned, I think does help. They've already taken steps in that direction. And, you know, there are some people that are critical of whether or not that's actually going to make a change at all. But I think it's definitely something that they're looking into already. And I think with more and more players getting injured like this, and not necessarily in the same injury, but more and more players are getting hurt in the college game before they get to the NFL and losing out on NFL careers. So I think it's the right step. Unfortunate loss to have to lose a star player like Tua, but I think it could potentially be what needed to happen for the NCAA to actually make a change.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have to disagree with you on that one, Spencer. I'm going to say no. And the reality is there's just too much red tape to sort through, I believe, for there to be actual change made on this issue. And I'll touch on that a little bit more later on. But I want to address Nick Saban for a second, because Tua Tagovailoa is one of my favorite players to watch in college football. I tell you what, the second that guy stepped on the field for his first start of the regular season, obviously the legend was kind of born in the national championship game with the dime of a throw to Devontae Smith to secure the title for Alabama. But after one game, after his first regular season start, I knew Tua was going to be probably the best quarterback we'd ever seen at the collegiate level, or at least I knew he was the most physically gifted. It's not a stretch to say that he changed the dynamic of the SEC forever. one thing, it's almost insulting to call his ball a spiral. It's that perfect. That is the most perfect ball I've ever seen a quarterback throw. And the thing about it is, sometimes as a coach, and Nick Saban knows this, Nick Saban is an experienced coach, the best coach in college football, one of the greatest coaches of all time. Sometimes as a coach, you have to protect a guy from himself. And Nick Saban failed to do that with Tua Tagovailoa. I get that he's a fiery competitor. We've seen that from him. He has a rather docile demeanor, but on the field, he's as fiery a competitor as there is. However, up 35-7 against a Mississippi State team that had no shot of challenging you. Not only that, but coming off a game in which Tagovailoa played and just about outgunned the #1 team in the country 20 days removed from ankle surgery. He needed to be out of that game. There's absolutely no reason why Nick Saban should have allowed Tua Tagovailoa to talk him into going back into that game. I disagree with that on so many levels, and I think to this point in his collegiate career, that's the biggest coaching mistake that Nick Saban has made, because you do not get talents like Tua Tagovailoa every year. That is a once-in-a-generation type of quarterback. Like I said, I believe he's the most physically gifted quarterback that I've ever seen at the collegiate level, and it's really going to hurt if we never get to see that translate over to professional football, because the reality is we don't know what's going to come of his career. This injury is so unpredictable. It's not as if these doctors are dealing with a torn ACL, the kind of thing that they see all the time. What do we know about this injury? Virtually nothing, other than it ended Bo Jackson's career. And I get that Tua Tagovailoa plays a less physically demanding position than Bo Jackson did, but still, he may never be the same. Now, as far as eligibility and the NCAA goes, again, I just think there's too much to sort through to be able to make meaningful change, at least immediately. And we see these players get injured all the time, and we continue to see inaction from the NCAA. I'm not saying this is how it should be. I'm saying this is how it will be. I don't think the NCAA's eligibility standards change anytime soon, and I really don't see pay for play coming into play in the foreseeable future.
All right, well, that was our first down. Here's our second down question. There's one team that to date is unquestionably a top contender for the national title this season. Coach O's Tigers out of Baton Rouge have had an outstanding season with redshirt senior Joe Burrow leading the squad. Now, guys, with the season coming to a close, the question is, would a late loss for LSU hurt the Tigers' chances for a playoff run? Spencer, we'll start with you.
I'm going to say that, yes, it would hurt the Tigers' chances at a playoff run. I would say no, there's no possible way that LSU makes the college football playoff with a loss in the SEC championship game to Georgia. And there's a lot of reasons why, but I think the most important reason is such a late loss to a team like Georgia, who has one loss to a bad South Carolina team. LSU's resume, while it's somewhat strong, they've played a lot of close games with bad teams. They beat 4 lost Texas by 7. They gave up 38 to Vanderbilt. 38 to Vanderbilt is a huge deal. Vanderbilt is number 128 out of 130 FBS teams in points per game. They score 15 points a game. They give up 37 to 4-7 Ole Miss last week. So LSU's defense is the worst defense that they've had in their program since before 1999 is the last time that I could find a defense this bad for LSU. So if you look at the numbers as far as playoff chances, as according to 538's playoff analytics, if LSU were to lose in the SEC championship game, if Oregon wins out, Oregon has a 45% chance to make the playoff. Oklahoma would have a 41% chance, and LSU's chance is 16%. If Utah wins the Pac-12, LSU has a 17% chance, while Utah has a 39% chance and Oklahoma has a 54% chance. And then if Penn State were to win the Big Ten, if LSU loses, then LSU's chance rises to 21%, but Penn State's at 66% and Oklahoma is at 51%. So there's a lot of numbers to it, because I think it's one of the things you really have to dive into deeply to understand, but I don't think there's a way in which LSU can lose that late into the season. And I know they have a good resume, they've beaten a lot of good teams, but so has Georgia. And then the problem is the amount of unbeaten teams around the country still, with Clemson, Ohio State, and I just don't think that there's enough on their resume to give them a nudge over a team like Oregon, who's going to have come off of a win in the Pac-12 championship, or Utah in the same way. So I think it's really tough for them to get in if they lose in the SEC championship.
Look, Spencer, that's all fine and well, but the committee's not a computer. Say what you will about the calculus, but if LSU goes into the SEC championship 12-0, they're in the playoff regardless of the outcome because this team is pound for pound the best in the country. We talked about Joe Burrow, we talked about Jamar Chase, we talked about Justin Jefferson, but the reality is, and you had some hate for the defense, but the defense has been really, really solid. And yes, they've given up some points to Texas, notably, to Vanderbilt, to Alabama, but the reality is LSU is doing enough to win football games and win them convincingly. And should they lose in the SEC championship, let's envision that scenario for a second. They still have wins over Texas, Florida, Auburn, Alabama, and A&M. Would you actually put a one-loss Oregon or Utah in over LSU? Because in no circumstance, if that scenario comes to fruition, in no circumstance can you tell me that LSU is still not, without question, one of the 4 best teams in the country based on what we've seen from them thus far. Now, I will say, this past Saturday, Ole Miss gave us half a blueprint on how to beat the Tigers. I say half a blueprint because they neglected to play any defense. But the reality is John Rice Plumlee exposed LSU's weaknesses, which begin with run defense. Now, the temptation when you play LSU is to engage them in a track meet, right? You see the offensive weapons that they have, CEH, Joe Burrow, Chase, and Jefferson, and your temptation is to try and outgun them. You can't do that. It doesn't work. They're more talented than you, inevitably. What you have to do is establish the run and use it to set up misdirection and play action down the field, because as talented as this LSU defense is, especially in the secondary, they do have a tendency to over-pursue, and I think that's what you saw on Saturday. Those are the weaknesses that Ole Miss exposed. Now, as far as the offensive side of the football is concerned for LSU, you can't let Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase create separation, because what I think you've seen this year is that the majority of the big plays that they've created have come on short routes that they've had space on and that they've turned into big gains. You have to make LSU beat you with physicality and not with speed. All told, though, I think LSU's headed to the college football playoff, regardless of the outcome in the SEC championship. And to me, right now, this team is the squad that's going to win the national title, in my opinion.
I think the biggest question is, how does the SEC championship loss look if it were to come down that way? Because if it's a close loss to Georgia, I think there's no way they get left out. But if Georgia were to beat them handedly, and you have a team like Oregon that wins in the same manner that maybe Ohio State did against Wisconsin back in 2014 and pulls off this massive, huge win, then I think that's the one case in which Oregon's coming off this really impressive win against a really good Utah team who has a really good defense, and then LSU maybe played a bad game against Georgia. So I think that's the deciding factor in that.
Fair enough. All right, well, to wrap up 3 and Out, we're going to kick it over to the West Coast. The Ducks out of Oregon and the Utes of Utah are sitting nicely at 6 and 7 in the rankings, respectively. Now, if things continue the way they are moving, we can expect them to meet in the Pac-12 championship. Now, Spencer, we're going to start with you as always. Who should the Pac-12 be rooting for in order for them to have a shot at the title?
I think it's a really, really easy call. The Pac-12 should be rooting for Oregon if they want to make the college football playoff. Oregon has the prestige as a program. They have the resume that could get them into the playoff. As a program, Oregon has already made the playoff once. They've got a close loss to Auburn, number 16 Auburn in a neutral site game. They've got a top 25 win against Washington, and their average margin of victory against Power 5 schools is 28 points. So Oregon's put it on their record already that they are the better team when they're compared to Utah. But if you look, they have a better strength of schedule, they have a better strength of record, they're higher in the FPI, they're higher in the college football playoff. So the fact that the college football playoff has them above Utah right now already proves that they view Oregon in a better light than Utah. So if you're the Pac-12 and you're hoping not to be left out for Oklahoma or for a one-loss SEC team or anything of that sort, you need Oregon to win in order for you to make it, because Utah as a program doesn't have the big name that could get them a nudge over in Oklahoma or something like that. If it's Oregon, there's a brand there that could potentially get them in, but if it's Utah, I just don't see a way they can do it.
I'll tell you what, Spencer, I think one of these teams is incredibly overrated, and I think one of these teams is supremely underrated. And I disagree with you categorically. I think the Pac-12 should absolutely be rooting for Utah. And you know what? Nobody watches this team, and it's because they play the West Coast games, the late-night kicks against teams that most of the nation doesn't even care about. But I tell you what, this Utah team is absolutely dominant. Throw away the loss to USC, Washington's the only other team that's come within 18 points of Utah. They've got the 4th best scoring defense in the country. They've only allowed more than 17 points twice. They're allowing 11.3 points per game and scoring 34.7. Zach Moss is an absolute stud at the running back position, and Tyler Huntley is a criminally underrated quarterback. I like them to beat Oregon in the Pac-12 championship, and I think based on name recognition, here's what you failed to take into account, Spencer. I think Utah's resume would look better with a win over Oregon than the Ducks' resume would look with a win over the Utes. And I don't care what the predictive indexes say. Again, Utah will get in as a one-loss Pac-12 champ, provided the top 3 hold serve, because this team is as solid a squad as you will find in the Pac-12 on both offense and defense.
I like that you mentioned Utah's quarterback and Utah's running back when Oregon has Justin Herbert, a potential top 10 NFL draft pick, and then C.J. Verdell, who is also a Pac-12 all-first-team running back as well. So,
I mean, the thing is, engaging in shootouts with Washington State is not the kind of game you want to be playing come December and January if you're Oregon. And Utah, yes, they fell to USC, and it really was an unexpected outcome with Matt Fink, the 3rd stringer at USC. I don't know what kind of magic he channeled on that night as the quarterback of that game.
It was Fitzmagic.
Potentially. But the reality is, Utah is more dominant than any team in the Pac-12 and arguably any team in the nation with the exception of Ohio State. Ohio State's waltzed through their schedule, but if you look at it game by game, Utah has handled their opponents as easily as anyone else in the country.
All right, fair enough. That's 3 and we're out. But after the break, we're going to send you back out to the remote crew as they break down the Sooners matchup with the Horned Frogs. We'll be back after this.
Welcome back to Gameday U. I'm Brooke Mursky here with Shiloh Sellers, Sam Brown, and William Sule. Let's talk some Sooner football. Big game tonight at 7 against the Horned Frogs. Guys, what are the keys to victory for both teams? Let's start with OU, and Shiloh, let's go with you first.
Well, my key point for OU has got to be Jalen getting rid of the ball. He's got to start using his running back committee. I mean, first of all, he's not a running back, so he shouldn't be the one running the ball. It puts him out there and creates dangerous situations. If we lose him, I'm not saying that Mordecai or a Rattler could come in and take care of things, but we don't want to lose him. And every time that he runs that ball, first of all, it's almost like teams are expecting it at this point. And I think that him always having that as his go-to is something that's kind of making him more predictable. I think that those fake-off plays and things like that they really have under the belt, I think that his designed runs are good, but there's entirely too many of him. And then we've talked in the show before just about how the O-line is not exactly everything that we've wanted it to be. And they showed little cracks in the foundation at times. And so having him sit and hold into the ball, all that pocket pressure created by the other side's defense, I mean, he just has to start utilizing the talent that's on his team. I mean, we talked about it before. The running back committee is deep, and it's just a matter of handing them the ball and seeing what they can do. I don't think that the reason why we haven't had a breakout running back is simply because they haven't gotten the chance to really show what they've got.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the stat line from Baylor, 27 carries for Jalen Hurts, 18 for Kennedy Brooks. That was his season high, which really says a lot to me. But
encouraging.
Yeah, encouraging. Hopefully him and Ramondre Stevenson get more touches today. But you talked about Jalen needing to use his weapons. And one weapon I'm looking out for is C.D. Lamb and his availability going into today. You could tell that they missed him in the first half offensively. Couldn't get anything going, any momentum. They really tried to go fast-paced and try and catch Baylor off guard. But the problem is they didn't have that safety blanket. C.D. Lamb is that safety blanket, the ability to make explosive plays and to get that first down. That is what he does. And without him, they really struggle to find any sort of energy. I mean, C.D. Lamb's almost got 1,000 yards on the year already, averaging over 100 yards a game through the 9 games he's played so far this season with 14 total touchdowns. He's had at least 70 yards in the last 4 games he's played. He's had at least 100 yards in 5 games so far this season. He might be a top 10 pick for all we know. I mean, he's absolutely
wouldn't surprise
electric.
me.
It wouldn't surprise me at this point. He's absolutely electric. his availability is going to be key today because Charleston Rambo is not a #1 wide receiver just yet. They have weapons all around the board, but they need a standout guy who can take the top off the defense at any given time. CeeDee Lamb is that guy, and the Sooners are going to need him today.
Yeah, I don't know if I would go as far to say that they need him.
They don't need him today, but
they
it
will
would
need
be nice
him down
to see.
the
I feel like
stretch,
I feel like if CeeDee doesn't play today, it's a little concerning.
Yeah, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And for me, it's kind of going a little bit off of what Shiloh said. To me, the key to victory is establishing the run. I mean, these running backs, like we've talked about over and over and over again, are incredible talents. Kennedy Brooks, Ramondre Stevenson, obviously losing Trey Sermon hurts, but like that's how deep this running back room is that you're really not that concerned about that from the offensive efficiency. Like this running back room is incredible, and they really got going in the second half and really helped establish this Oklahoma offense. I'm going to give you one guess. Oklahoma has been outgained on the ground one time this year. You want to guess what game that was? Kansas State. Exactly. They got outgained 102 to 213. Like they got blown out of the water. And to me, I mean, that stat tells it all. Like the only time that Oklahoma has lost this year, it was the only time this year that they got outgained on the ground. And I think that, to me, if you can establish the run that allows Jalen Hurts to have wide open pockets, it allows Jalen Hurts to have a little bit more time in the pocket to make reads, to get people open. It allows the play action pass to really become a lot more effective. And it's going to be something I talk about on the flip side for TCU in a little bit as well. But like to me, if Oklahoma can establish the run and do exactly the way that I think that Lincoln Riley really wants this offense to run, like it's air raid, but it's also not. Like it's a blend that no one knows how to deal with when it's working correctly, and like that's I think so important to what he was trying to do.
That Kansas State game, it's not like Kansas State was really locking down and really just stuffing them. They just didn't run the ball. Period. Yes. I mean, Kennedy Brooks led the team, led the running backs with what 6 carries.
Yeah, they think there were 6 carries total between all of the running backs.
And that's wild. Like that
shouldn't happen.
Quarterback should not be running the ball that much. It drives me nuts every time he holds on to it.
Well, on the other side of the ball for TCU, what do you think their keys to victory are for putting up a good game against OU?
I mean, we kind of touched on it already, and I kind of said the same thing earlier when we were talking about the issues that OU had with Baylor, but honestly, it's just capitalizing on OU's mistakes. It is OU's game to give away. And having those fumbles, having the interceptions, that's exactly what's going to give TCU the chance to make something happen. I mean, Max Duggan got a, 56.4 completion rate. He's averaging about 6.6 yards. Nothing special. Granted, he's one of 6 quarterbacks on that team. I mean, it really is OU's win to give away. There's no reason why TCU should be a really strong opponent. There's not a whole lot happening offensively for the Horned Frogs. And I mean, TCU's always had a pretty strong defense, and but I don't see them really having anything other than just maximizing on all of OU's mistakes, kind of just like K-State did, like Baylor did. I mean, like they're the #1 in the nation for offense for a reason. So it's kind of their game just to give away.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty true. They've been, like we said, they've been shooting themselves in the foot. Really, that's been the story of their losses and their close games. But TCU, to me, needs to be able to protect their quarterback, Max Duggan. That's the end scenario for me. The offensive line, not solid, 104th in the country in sacks allowed per game at 2.6. Ironically, Oklahoma's defense, 36th in the country in sacks per game at 2.6. That kind of seems to be the trend that we're going to follow here. Ronnie Perkins was a beast against Baylor, like we talked about, with 3 sacks, but 11 different Sooners have had a sack for the team this season. So a lot of different options for Alex Grinch to line up a lot of different packages, a lot of different blitz packages, and just a bunch of different looks. Max Duggan is a freshman. He's still learning as he goes. He's made a lot of progress, and he looks like he's going to have a bright future, but if you confuse him, if you can rattle the quarterback, especially as a freshman, and 80,000 people just loud as crap, that's going to throw, hopefully. Okay, maybe 70,000 people loud as crap. They got to capitalize on this mistake.
Fan base.
I got plenty of shade coming later. It's no big deal. They need to protect Max Duggan today if they want to have the time for him to be able to set up and make some decisions.
No, yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly. He's not a guy that you would trust down the stretch, especially when he's under duress. For me, the key to this victory for TCU is a little bit like what Shiloh was talking about, turnovers. This Oklahoma football team is only going to beat itself, especially against a TCU team that is just not up to stuff talent-wise to what they've been in the past. OU is currently tied at 103 in turnover margin at -5. I'm going to read you and they are 126th in turnovers forced. So for me, TCU is simultaneously forcing OU to make mistakes, but also limiting their own. I'm going to read you a list on live TV of the people that are ranked higher than OU in turnovers gained. Oregon State, North Texas, Houston, Vanderbilt, New Mexico State, Rice, Charlotte, Akron, New Mexico, Western Kentucky, UNLV, UTEP.
Akron, that's the one that
That is not a list you want to be a part of.
Akron's the one that
We are
hurts the most.
sandwiched between UTEP and Rutgers at 126 in turnovers gained. That is
that's
unacceptable.
That is depressing.
That's so sad. It's like I looked this up and it just baffled me. It's unbelievable.
You're like refreshing. Are you sure?
I'm like, I can't look.
You're clicking it, hoping it's gonna.
This is from like
it's gonna
2010.
change.
Like I can't. It was. It's crazy. And TCU is 69th in turnovers gained with 14 interceptions this year. Like they're a team, and like Gary Patterson always gets this team ready to play. Like they are always ready to go, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Like their offense is going to have problems today, I think.
They've always been solid defensively, like through the years of like having decent talent where they need to have that talent and having a disruptive enough defense to kind of cause offensive like OU to kind of think twice about what they're doing. I think for me, it's just I don't think that this offense really has what it. It's so hard because you say I don't think this offense really has what it takes, but then we never know how OU's defense is gonna play.
Absolutely.
If they play like they did in the second half, then we have no worries. If they play how they did in the first half, we need to all cross our fingers and pray to Jesus that we walk out with a win.
I'm praying to Jesus right now.
All the time.
So
what do you think my hands are crossed?
Yeah, well, we talked about OU's keys to victory. Who do you think is a key player in this game that will contribute, massive amounts to a win?
My man, he's 12 for 12 on field goals. Gabe Burkich.
Talk about praying.
Man.
God bless that guy.
He may never miss, like, ever.
No, he's the only guy that he steps up and like, we got it. Those are 3 points.
He has so much swagger.
He walks out.
Unbelievable.
He walks out to the tee for the game winner, and he's just walking backwards.
He's just
strutting. They always talk about how whenever he goes up for a kick, he literally turns to his holder and says, "This is for the Super Bowl." Like having that, like he is so cool under pressure. That's why he got the winning field goal for us with Baylor. I mean, this guy, it doesn't matter if it's for the Super Bowl or not, he's gonna make it. And so he's gotta be the one guy that I have to say has been reliable all season long. Digger the kicker, move over, because Burkich is here.
Making a run for special teams.
I'm trying to think of something that rhymes with Burkich.
Workich?
I don't think there is anything.
It's like orange.
I don't know. This one's tough.
Victory.
I'm done. I give up.
Beast. Unbelievable.
Don't hurt your brain.
Those are all
we
can just do a word.
I need some water.
We don't need to run.
Oh man, yeah, Gabe Burkich. I mean, yeah, like I said, the moment's never too big for that guy, and that's something that stands out every time about him. My player, I'm going to go to TCU's side for my pick, and this is a guy not a lot of people know of. This may be the first time you guys have heard of this name, and it's a name for you. Trayvon Merrick-Woodard, the safety for TCU. He's one of their better players on the defense, second on the team in tackles, and leads them with 4 interceptions. He's also second on the team in passes defended. Now that's going to be key today because the guy in first place is Jeff Gladney. Now Jeff Gladney, their star corner, late day 1, early day 2 prospect right now from what I've read. Long, lanky defender, can really cover the edge. But he's going to be missing the first half because of targeting. He was suspended or ejected from the last game and will miss the first half. If CD is available today, Trayvon Merrick is going to be that safety blanket, the ball hawk in the secondary, and he's going to have his work cut out for him. He's really going to need to be able to limit those explosive plays like he has all year long as the safety. And I mean, it's going to be hard, like no doubt about it. He's got to be able to contain CD and the rest of these weapons. Baylor succeeded. They thrived on limiting the big plays, making OU work for it, really making them grind for it. 4 yards here, 5 yards here, 3 yards, a dump off for 7 yards. Nothing big, really. TCU's going to have to do the same thing today, and it starts with my man Trayvon Merrick.
I mean, I definitely have never heard the name, but I'm not going to forget it anytime soon.
It's not the way you think it's spelled, I guarantee it.
I mean, I'm looking right at it, and I don't know. I wouldn't have been able to guess that correctly.
Don't look at my notes, man.
I would not have been able to guess correctly how to pronounce that. I'm going to stay on the TCU side of the ball as well for my X factor. And for me, it's not really an X factor that I expect to have a good big game, but a guy that I think if TCU wants to stay in this game, needs to have a big game. It's Darius Anderson, their running back, the running back for TCU. I talked about the importance of the run game for Oklahoma. On the flip side of the ball, for TCU, if like I've said, if TCU can stay keeping pressure off of Max Duggan, having like Darius Anderson having a big game, like it'll set up just an incredible, like it'll set up things that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. Like if Oklahoma can shut him down, it'll make Max Duggan make the plays. And I think Oklahoma fans can rest easy knowing that Max Duggan isn't going to be the guy to beat them. I think if TCU is going to stay with this game, it's going to have to be him. In their big games this year, he's been very Jekyll and Hyde. He's had 170 yards, 150 yards, 100 yards in wins this year. And then he's had 40 yards, 50 yards, 30 yards in losses this year.
What kind of carries was he winning? Do you know?
Their last game in their win against Texas Tech, he had 19 attempts, 87 yards, and 4.6 yards per carry. So he's not really blowing the barn off the door, or the door off the, not the barn.
Blowing the barn.
But he's not blowing the doors off the barn.
I can imagine the rest of the barn blowing off and the doors
are just standing there. I mean, we're in Tornado Alley. It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But if TCU is going to have to really hope that he has a good game and comes to play today if they expect to do anything against the Sooners defense.
By the way, we talked about Max Duggan. I'm trying to think back. Was there a freshman to play at Gaylord Memorial Stadium since Kyle Kempt back in 2017? I'm trying to think right now. I don't think so.
I mean, not off the top of my head.
Yeah, we may have to get someone to dive into the stat sheets or some of the archives. But this might be the first freshman to start at Owen Field from the opposing team since Kyle Kempt.
Yeah.
Something to think about.
Brock Purdy.
I gotta think about it too.
Brock Purdy is a sophomore.
Oh, right. I was thinking last year.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, so in the remaining schedule for OU,
Yeah, I just got off track.
there's TCU tonight, and we've got Oklahoma State. What do you guys think is going to happen in tomorrow and next week?
Well, I was worried about Oklahoma State, but I can't say that I'm too worried anymore. Spencer Sanders going down hurts them a lot.
Yeah.
I don't trust the transfer from Hawaii to really be anything, but it's Bedlam. So you never really can count them out.
It's in Stillwater.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing is even if Drew Brown doesn't play well, they're going to give the ball to Chuba Hubbard like 60 times and just let him go bananas and see if he can go maybe break Samaje Perine's record. Why not or something like that.
I mean, God, I hope not.
That's what worries
honestly,
me the most.
Chuba is the only guy that worries me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's simply because of how wishy-washy our defense has been. There's no doubt in my mind that we could potentially take care of him. But you saw, a lot of missed tackles just in Baylor when you had one-on-one coverage. Kenneth Murray had at least 2 different situations where he just missed it. Mm-hmm. And it was one-on-one coverage. And it's kind of like, dude, you're the leader of our defense. You've got to really show by example. If we win either one of these games or if OSU loses today, we automatically are getting that Big 12 spot, which I think is kind of good, kind of bad. You kind of talk about getting complacent and say, OSU loses today, then how big of an impact is that going to play on the Sooners' mentality when they go to Stillwater and play them, knowing, we already got, a spot in the Big 12. So that also worries me, just talking about mentality, because we have seen a lot of mental errors from the Sooners. A lot of really great stuff from the Sooners mentally as well, but
it's just very on and off.
It is. Yeah. It's hot and cold, and you never know what you're going to get, and I think that is what all of Sooner Nation is kind of on edge for.
Yeah, no, I agree with that whole, and the mentality of them being complacent and not being looking too far ahead.
Alligators.
It's yeah. Are they alligators or are they lions?
I'm chomping your head right now in camera 6.
I think it's a really good point. I think that's really the only way that this Oklahoma team can go into bed. The way that OSU is built right now, they just really don't. I don't want to say they don't stand a chance, but they're definitely not in a good spot.
No. Yeah. Agreed. Well, let's take a break. After the break, Kurt, Spencer, and Parker are going to let you know whose playoff hopes are still alive and whose are still fading. This is Game Day U.
Here we are back in the studio giving you more. Here we are back in the studio giving you more from the college football across the nation. Kurt Watson alongside Spencer Forsyth and Parker Thurin. We apologize for those technical difficulties on our end. It's time for one of my favorite segments, The Fork. I'm going to give you guys 3 different teams, and the 2 of you will duke it out regarding which of those has a playoff chance still alive, or if you're forking them and saying their chances are dead. So
Stick a fork in them, huh?
I'm ready for it. You guys ready to stick a fork in them?
Let's do it.
All right, we got 3 great teams here. Well, maybe great. We'll see what you guys say. But first one up, Mr. Forsyth, Baylor.
So I am sticking a fork in Baylor. I'm saying that they are done. Listen, Baylor's schedule is so weak that they needed an undefeated season to make the playoff. I think there was no way they could take a loss throughout the regular season and still make it to the college football playoff. If you look at their schedule, their non-conference wins are 3-9 FCS Stephen F. Austin, 4-6 UTSA, and then they had a 21-13 win against 1-9 Rice. Their schedule is full of close wins. They haven't been controlling any of the games they've played. They only beat Iowa State by 2. They beat Texas Tech by 3 in overtime. West Virginia, they only beat them by 3. And then they beat TCU by 6 in overtime as well. And they really need a little bit of a miracle there to pull that one out. So they're number 55 in strength of schedule. They're number 16 in game control. And they're number 21 in the FPI. I think they have little to no shot to actually make the playoff now that they've lost to Oklahoma. If they were to go on, win out, that means they beat Texas, they beat Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. If they look impressive in doing so, I think they've got a decent shot to maybe get to 5 or 6. But I think overall, their schedule is just too weak, and they haven't really dominated their bad schedule. I think there's no way Baylor makes it. I think they're done.
All right, Parker, what do you think?
Spencer, come on now. If Baylor wins out, you can't tell me you're not at least thinking about putting them in that discussion.
They have 0 top 25 wins.
They beat Oklahoma State.
That's their one, but they weren't ranked at the time.
Okay, but does it really matter whether they were ranked at the time or not? If you're beating good teams, it shouldn't matter whether they were ranked when you played them or not. Regardless, here's what I think. Again, if Baylor wins out, they're definitely going to be in the conversation. Now, I'm not saying it's likely that they're going to make the college football playoff, but they're absolutely still alive in the college football playoff picture, because if their only loss is by 3 points to Oklahoma, and then they go and avenge that in the Big 12 title game, let's not forget, that was a pretty good look for OU last year when they went into the Big 12 title game and avenged their only loss of the season. The committee will take note, because at that point, Baylor would have beaten every single team in the Big 12, just like Oklahoma did last year. If they went out, they would have wins over as many as 5 ranked teams, depending on where teams like Kansas State and Iowa State fall at the end of the year. Plus, again, they would have avenged the loss to OU. And that's strength of schedule and strength of record, especially. Like, you forget that they were coming into the matchup against Oklahoma at McLean Stadium, ranked 3rd in strength of record, which is a metric that the committee values. So don't count Baylor out, not by a long shot. The Bears are absolutely still in this. Again, I don't think it's likely that they come in and beat Oklahoma, but they're winning football games. And regardless of how you're winning football games, if you are winning football games, you stay in the college football playoff conversation, regardless of external factors in my mind.
All right, so Spencer, you're forking them. Parker, you're saying they're still alive. I like it. Some good debate there. All right, so for next up, we have the Crimson Tide out of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. We talked about it earlier in the show. They're coming off a big injury. Their star quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa, out for the season. Now, do they have a shot still with the loss of him? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they only scored 3 points last week after he was out with his injury. Yeah, so Spencer, what do you think?
Yeah, in short, no. Alabama has no shot at the college football playoff. They're absolutely done. Since Tua took over in the 2017 national championship game as Alabama's starting quarterback, primary quarterback, for that game especially. He's completed 70% of his passes for 6,900 yards, 86 total touchdowns, and only 10 interceptions. He holds the Alabama record for the most touchdowns accounted for in school history after only starting for 2 seasons. He has the NCAA record for passing efficiency from last season. And now they're going to turn from the greatest quarterback in the history of their school to Mac Jones, a guy who is a 3-star quarterback from Jacksonville, Florida, who, let's be honest, his only real play time this season has come against Tennessee, Arkansas, and Ole Miss. The common denominator is those teams are terrible. Mac Jones has not played against a good defense the entire time that he's been in Alabama. And next week, he's going to have to travel to Jordan-Hare to play against Auburn in their stout defense. And they still aren't going to be able to make the SEC championship game. So they've got to prove to the committee, they're 5th right now, right? They're 5th right now. They've got to prove to the committee in the next 2 weeks, without an SEC championship game, that they are worthy of having the spot with Mac Jones. And they play 3-8 Western Carolina this week. That's not a good resume booster.
I think we're thinking the same thing.
Oh, this team is so forked. They are so done, and it's great because Alabama's made the college football playoff every single year thus far that the playoff system has been implemented, and it's nice to see a little bit the changing of the guard. But look, barring a renaissance for Mac Jones, which I don't foresee, no one's taking this team seriously with only 1 ranked win, no conference title, and a backup quarterback. Look, you said it. Mac Jones was a 3-star. You know where Mac Jones belongs? In the MAC, not starting for Alabama. I can't wait for him and Bo Nix to duke it out in the Iron Bowl for the rights to the Jake Browning Award for worst QB on a likely New Year's 6 team. Like, look at this. This is the guy? This is the guy you're counting on to get you into the college football playoff. How is he your best option behind Tua? I mean, does Joe Namath have any eligibility left? Because you're better off with a septuagenarian than this guy as your starting quarterback.
I have a question.
Yes.
Tua's little brother is on Alabama's roster, and he was a 4-star quarterback coming out of high school last year. Why is it that he needs to sit and let Mac Jones be the guy when I think we would all agree there's little to no chance that Mac Jones is better than Tua's younger brother? I just don't see it.
I'm not questioning the way Saban runs things. All I'm saying is, Saban, it's not a good look for you right now.
After the Ole Miss game, I might question how Nick Saban's running things.
Fair enough. All right, well, for the sake of time, we'll go and get to our last team to either fork or not. Minnesota. A lot of good stuff coming from them in the beginning of the season, but it's definitely been more of a struggle thus far with their first loss a few weeks back. I guess that was last week.
Yeah, I'm saying fork the boat. We're not rowing the boat anymore. We're forking the boat. Minnesota fell to 11th after their loss to Iowa. That means that the committee right now views them as worse than every one-loss team in the rankings. That's Oregon, that's Utah, Alabama, Oklahoma, Penn State, the like. They need a miraculous win in a Big Ten championship game in order to pull off a playoff berth. They need an Ohio State 59-0 over Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game kind of performance in order to steal that spot. But I don't see any way in which Minnesota can come back from this loss to Iowa. And it was ugly at first. They made it closer near the end, but it was ugly to start off. So I just don't see them having a good route to it. Their only quality win is over Penn State, who I don't even think Penn State's very good, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But I just don't see it. They're close. They have close wins against bad teams. 8-3 FCS South Dakota State, and I like South Dakota State. I'm not calling them a bad team, but they are an FCS team. They 4-6 Fresno State. They only beat them 38-35 in overtime. 6-4 FCS Georgia Southern. They beat them 35-32, and then 4-6 Purdue. They only beat them 38-31. So their resume doesn't look that strong, and they've got a really, really big hill to climb in front of them.
Well, I stuck a fork in Alabama, but I'm not going to do it to Minnesota. I tell you what. First off, Iowa is a much better team than people realize, and you can pencil the Hawkeyes in for one big home upset every year, and it just happened to fall on the week where Minnesota came to Kinnick Stadium, so I'm not putting a whole lot of stock into that just yet. But here's the reality. Minnesota has one of the best wins in the country by any measure. Penn State came to Minnesota, and the Gophers dispatched them, which you have to take into account when you're looking at their playoff resume because that stands as a really, really good win. And if they were to bounce back, win the Big Ten with a victory over Ohio State in the conference title game, it'd be really tough to leave them out. Look, Tanner Morgan isn't half bad.
Rashad Bateman is a Biletnikoff semifinalist. Also, that defense generates turnovers, and turnovers will win you football games against talented teams. Ohio State hasn't seen a team as solid on both sides of the football as Minnesota. And granted, every metric suggests the Buckeyes are far and away the best team in the Big Ten, but Minnesota's been defying the odds all season. And I tell you what, don't count this Gophers team out.
All right, fair enough. Well, that is going to be all the time we have right now here in the studio. We're going to toss it back over to the team in Studio B. Brooke, Shiloh, William, and Sam will have their score predictions, final words, and call-outs for the upcoming OU game. Keep it here. We'll be back here in a little bit. You're watching Game Day U on OU TV.
Welcome back to our last segment of the day from the remote team. I'm Brooke Bursky here with Shiloh Sellers, Sam Brown, and William Sule. It's time for final words, call-outs, and score predictions. Shiloh, get us started. What is your final word?
Yeah, I mean, my word's going to be momentum, and it's simply just carrying the momentum from the second quarter in Baylor through the rest of the season. Not just this game, through the rest of the season. I mean, we talked about it earlier. Sam said it. That team that we saw in the second half is a winner. It is a playoff hopeful. I mean, there's no reason why we should be going backwards. That's for diggity darn sure. I mean,
oh, she's serious.
It's right. It's just it's the simple fact of keeping the ball going forward and not taking those steps back like we kind of saw them did midseason whenever they lost to K-State, and then I feel like we got the old Sooners back. So I want to keep this momentum going.
Well, she was looking at her, doing her call out. I was like looking at the script and everything because she got my final word, which is carry. I mean, you nailed the dot on the head. And
Can I steal it with a different word? Is that what just happened?
I mean, that's pretty much what you did. Yeah, I'll take it. I mean, it's not just the momentum, really. They need to carry over the energy from Baylor in the second half. That's something that was lacking in the first half. The energy is contagious. That's something we've noticed this year. After that takeaway that Parnell Motley forced, Patrick Fields recovered, everyone was jumping around. The coaches, the players, the equipment managers, everyone was getting into it.
Punched the ball.
He went for it. They got to carry that energy over to today. TCU is, although it is TCU, they're having a rough season. It's not a team to mess with just to just count out. I mean, we can't count out Iowa State. You can't count out anybody in the Big 12, really. So they got to carry over the energy. What did I say? I said whatever. They got to carry over the energy over to today to TCU. Let's get this done quickly.
Yeah, mine's a little bit similar to that in a different way. My word is pressure. And for two different reasons. One, this team needs to learn how to handle pressure because up until this point this year they haven't. Like every big game that they've had, they've other than maybe Texas. I mean, even really in Texas, they didn't perform, I think, the way that they want to. Mm-hmm. They haven't put together two halves yet this year, and I think that is a lot of it is mentality. Like you have to have the ability to handle that pressure, whether or not that you like feel like everything's going your way. Like handle the pressure. Also, pressure the quarterback. I talked about it earlier in the show. It's vitally important. If Ronnie Perkins, Neville Gallimore on his senior night, by the way, but if Big Nev can get some sacks on the board, I think this game goes a lot more smoothly for this defense.
Oh, as soon as they start getting sacks, I think Max is going to really start to falter.
That's what they did the first 7 weeks of the season. That's what made them so successful.
Yeah. My word is adjustment. I think, obviously, looking back to last week, they made a huge adjustment from the first half to the second half. I think they need to be better about making those adjustments in this game and quicker to that matter so we don't have something like last week happen. Sure. But let's go.
or 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
My heart can't handle it anymore, honestly.
Exactly. I could use this word in so many ways to describe this team and looking back on last week and the rest of the season. But let's move on to call-outs. Shiloh, who do you have?
So I'm going to call out, it really was the first game that he didn't do so good, but man, did he not do so good. Jaden Davis, I mean, he got ran. It was nasty. I mean, that Baylor Bear took off and he said bye. I mean, he was not coming back. He really, as a freshman, has done really well pass coverage, but he's just like that play right there. He's missing stuff. I mean, he's getting outran, and that's simply, if you can't catch him, you can't tackle him. I mean, whenever that happened in Baylor, poor guy got taken out. He never touched the gridiron afterwards. I mean, and it's just a simple, it sucks whenever you mess up and you can't redeem yourself, but it's also, you know, it was important for them to know that they had the best of the best out there on the field, and you gotta make tackles. I mean, you gotta be there.
That's the game.
And Jaden Davis just couldn't do it. So I gotta call you out, guy. I hope that you have been running. I hope that you've strapped the weight on and are getting faster, because that is what you need. And I wanna see you really step up this game.
That's a good one, the freshman. I'm actually not gonna call out a player today. This is the first time I've done this. And I'm calling out a very specific section of the OU fan base. It's the students. I said this after Iowa State. Out of all the blue bloods in America, Alabama, Oklahoma, LSU, Georgia, Michigan, Penn State, you name it, all the blue bloods, Oklahoma, I'll say it right now, has far and away the worst student section out of all of them. I mean, you look at Iowa State, I'm getting looks from the cameramen and stuff who sit in the student section. When you look at Iowa State and half the student section is empty, 2 sections of the stadium are empty. That's 7,000 people right there. The players feed off the students more than anybody in the stadium, and half of them aren't even there because they want to go out. Oh, it's cold. I want to go home. I don't like standing out here all game. Give me a freaking break. Give me a break. I went to every game until the end when I was here, before I started covering football. You should be able to do that. You should want to do that. Nick Saban actually said it best. You expect us to play for all 4 quarters. We expect you to be there for all 4 quarters. Sooners, it's senior night, it's electric, the last home game. You got to show out and you got to be loud.
That student section is the loudest section in the stadium.
It's
there is a huge difference when they're not there.
It was depressing against Iowa State.
It was quiet.
That's part of the reason why it was so close. I'll say it right now, was because you saw the atmosphere just absolutely died, and a lot of that was because of the students.
Yeah, I mean, and Lincoln Riley said as much. He couldn't go right after him because he's the coach. But I mean,
I don't care. I got nothing.
He said in his inavailability later in the week that he was basically just disappointed that the students weren't there the whole time.
It's that sad point when your dad's like, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed.
I would never want to disappoint him.
No, it would break my heart.
Who's your call out?
My call out's Jalen Hurts, and I got.
It's like the 4th week in a row he's been called out.
It's low hanging fruit, but it's necessary. He's QB1, and of the 13 turnovers that Oklahoma has had this year, he has been 9 of them. It's unacceptable, and I get that he's got the ball in his hands more than anybody else, but he's fumbled 4 times, he's thrown 5 picks. The interceptions really aren't that bad to me, but it's the fumbles, just the inability to take care of the ball. And the interceptions that he has thrown have just been bad throws, they've been bad decisions, it's just been bad all around. I get it if you're making interceptions in deep in the 4th quarter and you're throwing a Hail Mary and it's do or die at that moment. But when it's 1st and 10 and you're throwing the ball up and there's 3 guys surrounding Charleston Rambo, what are you doing, man? It's your 5th year playing college football, basically.
You should be able to
chill
make
out.
it past the second read.
Take a second, make a read, check down. Jeremiah Hall hasn't gotten any run in the last couple of weeks.
But that's what happens is he looks for what is called, and when it's not there, he
runs.
It.
He runs.
I'm calling you out, man. Just figure it out. If you were going to even challenge to be I think we talked about it a little bit. The Heisman Trophy race is probably over. And part of the reason why is because Joe Burrow takes care of the football, and Jalen Hurts is not this year. And I think that if this game should be comfortable for the Sooners, unless Jalen makes it uncomfortable.
Well, my call out is Neville Gallimore. This guy's a redshirt senior, and he hasn't had a sack since we played Texas. And before that, he hasn't had a sack since we played Houston, the first game, and he had 1. He's had 3 for the season. So, I mean, in his position, I feel like he should have way more than that. He should be more of a dynamic player, and he should have more pressure on these guys. He should be more aggressive. And we're not really seeing that from him now. So I think going into TCU, there's a lot of pressure on him to be better, to get these sacks and to make tackles.
That's a nice first call out.
Pressure.
That was Brooke's first call out on the
That
show.
was my first call out ever.
That was great.
Thanks.
Great job.
Well, now we're going to go into score predictions. So Shiloh, what do you got?
So I definitely have OU taking this one, 42-17. TCU doesn't have really the offense that I think is what it's going to take to really put some points on the board. unless Oklahoma does what they do and really just gives it to them. I don't know. But this is the optimistic approach. I think that OU is going to come back with kind of something to prove after their game against Baylor. I don't think they're going to let TCU go very far. So, yeah, I've got 42-17. I think that they're going to try to make a run for sure.
Yeah, I'll rock with Oklahoma as well. Seems pretty obvious at this point. But I actually think they're going to run up the score today. I'm going to go 51-23. I think Oklahoma comes out guns blazing. They want to prove that last week the second half was the version of the team that they are. And so I think they're going to come out with intensity. They're going to come out with effort. I think they get on the board early and often, really get to Max Duggan a couple times in the first half. And I think Oklahoma will cruise today. I think this won't be one of those games, knock on wood, if we can find some wood somewhere. This is marble, but I feel like it shouldn't be a shocker. You never know at this point, but I think Oklahoma will have a more relaxed day today.
God, I hope you're right. I don't know if my heart can handle it anymore.
I'm just thinking of the last senior day against West Virginia 2 years ago. They were up, 42-7 at half or something, 38-7 at halftime?
I wouldn't be mad about that, but I have it a little bit more competitive than you, but I have a similar score. I have OU winning 42-24. To me, this game it should be along the lines of West Virginia, how it happened earlier this year. Big score at halftime by OU, and then kind of trickling in. I wouldn't be surprised to see a little Tanner Mordecai today. But I mean, again, I think we're all being a little optimistic because this game could easily turn into something that's a lot more scary than what we're predicting. But 42-24 is what I'm going to go with for sure.
Yeah, I don't think the score is going to run that high. I'm saying 35-17. When you look at it, TCU has lost 3 of 5 of their games to ranked teams. So they're not just throwing these games away. I think it's going to be a little bit closer. I think we're going to have that aggressiveness coming from the win from Baylor, but I think TCU is going to expect to play OU and have these high hopes, so I think it's going to be a little bit closer than that. But that's all the time we have for right now, and that's a wrap. Don't go anywhere just yet. When we return, Parker and Spencer make their picks for today's top matchups, and we'll let you know who is on upset alert.
We are inching closer and closer to kickoff between the Horned Frogs out of Fort Worth and the Sooners of Norman. Welcome back to Game Day U. I'm Kurt Watson here with Spencer Forsyth and Parker Thune to wrap up this week's edition of Game Day U. We are ending this week's show with our Pick'em segment where we will pick some of the biggest games from the week in college football. Gentlemen, y'all ready to go?
Let's do it.
All right, first off, we are going to go with the Fighting Jimbo Fishers of Texas A&M versus Georgia. That's the Aggies, but you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to go ahead and take Georgia. A&M left the Big 12 in 2011, and they've been awful ever since. They've still not ever gotten out of their hole of mediocrity. Kellen Mond is still their quarterback. Kellen Mond still can't throw, so there's no way that A&M pulls this one out. Georgia's going to win it pretty easily.
Listen, here's the reality of the situation. Georgia's not a college football playoff caliber football team. And I'm going with the upset today. I'm going Texas A&M over Georgia. Look, Georgia needed some huge breaks to get past Florida and Auburn. I think the luck runs out today. Give me the 12th man on the road against Jimbo Fisher's, or rather in Jimbo Fisher's first signature win. The Aggie secondary is allowing less than 200 passing yards per game. I think they're going to put the clamps on Jake Fromm today.
All right, next up, we're going to go down south to the Bears in Baylor versus that team that we don't like talking about out of Austin. Let me get a horns down real quick. Texas. Who do you got, Spencer?
Yeah, I've got Baylor in this one. Coming off the loss to Oklahoma, they're going to have something to prove. They've really done pretty well in closing out close games. I think this one's going to stay close. Baylor's going to edge it out by a little bit, but Texas has 4 losses in each of their last 10 seasons, so I think we get to 5 today, and Baylor takes this one pretty easily.
What do you know? That school down south is bad at football again. Order restored, am I right?
So you're saying Texas is not back?
Sources are confirming Texas is not back.
Confirmed. Texas is not back.
Good.
The Bears are about to unleash the fire of 1,000 suns on Texas today. After that loss last week, I would imagine Baylor comes out hungry and eager to prove that the second half of last week's game against Oklahoma is not indicative of the kind of team they are. I think Baylor wins big today.
Fun fact about Baylor, they're the #1 defense in the Big 12. Texas is the 6th defense in the Big 12. They rank number 110 in total defense and number 83 in scoring defense in the NCAA.
Another fun fact, last week, Texas as a team rushed 26 times for 54 yards. The run game is virtually non-existent down in Austin.
Interesting. All right, like the picks. Moving right along, we're going to go Michigan versus Indiana. Spencer, who you got for this one?
Yeah, I'm going to take Michigan. Indiana has had 3 losses to the top 25 teams they've played this year. Every top 25 team they've played, they've lost to. They've snuck out some close wins in the last 3 weeks against Rutgers and Nebraska. I think Michigan's really starting to hit their stride with Shea Patterson. They've won 3 convincing games in a row. So give me the Wolverines in that one.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Have you watched?
Got to roll with my hero.
Have you watched Michigan play games on the road?
I have, but I've got to roll with my hero.
It's not pretty.
Sticking with Shea Patterson.
It's not pretty, and that's why I'm going with the Hoosiers. I like Indiana in the upset in this one. I was impressed with this team last week as they took Penn State down to the wire. Look, I'm obviously operating under the assumption that Whop Phillier plays. If he's unavailable, that could change things and force Indiana to shuffle some things around on the offensive side of the football, but I don't believe in Michigan. I haven't all year. I'm not convinced that they're as good a team as their ranking indicates, and I think Indiana lends some credence to that theory with a victory today.
All right, before our biggest game of the year, we're going to go with SMU versus Navy for this next pick. Spencer, who you got?
Yeah, I'm going with the Ponies. SMU is going to pull this one out. Navy, I think, is a team that I would like to be able to get behind because, I support the troops. But their defense is one of the things they really predicated their team on. Their defense, and then they run the option, they slow the pace of play down. So I was expecting them when they played Notre Dame, who has an average offense. They're somewhere in like the 20 to 50 range in their scoring offense and their total offense. I was expecting Army to shut Notre Dame down when they played them, and they were unable to do so. Notre Dame really ran away with that one. So as Navy comes into this game against SMU, who has the 6th best scoring offense in college football, I just don't think, just knowing what I know about Navy now and how they played against Notre Dame last week, I don't think they've got the firepower to slow down Shane Buechele and the number 6 offense in college football in SMU.
Okay, can we quit with the Shane Buechele hype? I mean, can we stop acting like this isn't the same guy that got benched at Texas? This dude's still a sugar cookie with an arm. I'm sorry.
Listen, He's had over 300 yards in almost every single one of his games this year. Shane Buechele has had a great season at SMU. They're running the spread effectively, which is something that they couldn't say at Texas when he was playing under Tom Herman. So I think Shane Buechele has improved as a player and as a passer. He's in a system that's better for his skill set. And SMU as an offense in general is just much better than Texas was. And they've been playing pretty good schools, pretty good defenses, and they've been just putting them away. So.
Okay, on to my pick. Look, the rhetoric isn't convoluted here. Navy runs the triple option, and SMU doesn't play defense to the tune of 426 yards per game and 32.7 points per game allowed. They're 91st in the FBS in total defense. And East Carolina, 3-8 East Carolina, put up 644 yards of total offense on the Ponies last week. I'm going with Navy, and I think Navy wins convincingly.
All right, well, the biggest matchup on the slate today is in the Big Ten, and it's biggest matchup between the Big Ten and across the nation. So the Nittany Lions enter the horseshoe in hopes of taking down the number 2 team in the country. With their playoff hopes barely hanging on, a win today could bring them back into the conversation for the 4th and final spot. The Nittany Lions can spoil the Buckeyes' perfect season with a win on the road this morning and bring chaos to the top 4. If Ohio State can take care of business, they can solidify their case for the number 1 spot in the college football playoff. They enter the arena today having won each of their last 4 games by at least 30 points. And if Penn State is going to pull this upset off, they're going to have to slow down Justin Fields and that Buckeye offense. Spencer, do you believe that the Buckeyes can pull it off?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to go with Ohio State. I just don't think Penn State has the offensive firepower mostly to keep up with Ohio State. Ohio State ranks 1st in college football in scoring offense and total offense, something that Oklahoma has done for a lot of the past 3 seasons since Lincoln Riley's been in Norman. But Ohio State has that crown now. But then on the other side of the football, they're also the number 1 scoring defense in the country, only allowing 9 points a game. So I don't see any sort of world where Sean Clifford, who on the season is completing 52% of his passes, and he averages 160 yards in games against top 20 defenses. I don't see a world in which Sean Clifford can play against Ohio State and actually put up points in a manner that can keep up with Justin Fields and Ohio State?
Look, there's a reason that the Buckeyes are 19.5-point favorites against a top 10 team, and it's because they're that dominant. Ohio State, throughout this entire season, has been absolutely unchallenged, the most dominant team in college football by a long shot. I think this is going to be a closer game than people think. I really do. I think it comes down to the environment. If it were at Beaver Stadium, I might feel differently. But with this game being played at the Horseshoe, I do have faith in Justin Fields and the Buckeyes to come out on top. Again, a closer game than you think it's going to be, but I'll take Ohio State.
All right, guys, so before we get out of here, moving right along quickly, who are your upset picks for this week? Who do you think has a chance of not winning the game that everyone might be expecting them to win?
Yeah, well, we talked through some of the teams that potentially I could have picked an upset in like the Texas A&M game or something like that. I really kind of struggled to put one together just because I'm not sure how many upsets are really on the horizon. But I decided I'm going to go with Utah State over Boise State. Boise State, the number 21 team in the college football playoff rankings right now. I think Utah State is a team that has sneaky firepower with quarterback Jordan Love, a guy who's projected to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft. He's had a little bit of a shaky season, but I think you have to understand he lost a lot of his top receivers after last season. So I'm going to go with Utah State over Boise State.
I'm all in on the hermeneutics this morning. You see what I did there? I'm going with Arizona State. 13.5-point underdogs to Oregon. I think Herm Edwards and the Sun Devils are due for a big win today, and they're going to expose Oregon as the massively overrated team that I think they are. Secondary is only allowing 271 passing yards per game. They're playing at home. Justin Herbert has been inconsistent as of late, and Herm knows how to coach in big games. Forks up today.
All right, well, thank you so much for watching Game Day U here at the Gaylord Hall Studios at the University of Oklahoma. We'll be off next week for Thanksgiving, but keep a lookout for our postseason specials with hopefully a Big 12 championship, but we will hopefully be coming to you live from Arlington, or maybe not live, we'll see, for the Big 12 championship. For our producer, Josh Knight, Parker Thune, and Spencer Forsyth, I'm Kurt Watson. Boomer Sooner, everybody.